Hello and welcome back to Jules Math Tools. In our session today, we are calculating the LCM of two numbers using two different division ladders. And this is part two in our series on calculating the LCM using the division ladder. So if you want to see how this is done, let's get started. So in our example today, we're going to be calculating the LCM of 40 and 60 using two separate division ladder. So remember that when you're using the division ladder, we're using prime numbers only, and we're also using numbers that are going to be divisible by this number, meaning no remainders. So there are no remainders in the division ladder. Either it divides out completely or we find a different number that we can use. So let's begin by prime factorizing 40. So I'm looking for a prime number that I can divide 40 by without a remainder. And there are two numbers that you can use. You can decide to begin with 2 or you can decide to begin with 5. Whichever number you decide to begin with is completely fine. Remember that as long as you work out the question correctly, we should still end up with the exact same prime factors. So I'm going to begin with the number 5. So 5 will divide into 48 times. And now I need a prime number that I can divide 8 by, which is going to be 2, since 8 is an even number. 2 divides into 8 4 times. Again, I can use 2 because 4 is an even number and every even number is divisible by 2. So 2 divides into 4 twice. And now to end my division ladder off, I will continue dividing by 2. And 2 will divide into 2 once. And remember that once we use the division ladder, we've divided to 1. That means our number is completely prime factorized and you can now stop. So now I'm going to begin prime factorizing my number 60. Now with 60, there are 3 prime factors that we can use for 60. I can decide to use 2, I can decide to use 3, or I can decide to use 5. Either one of those numbers that you feel comfortable with, you can begin with. So for this example, instead, I'm going to begin with the number 3. So 3 divides into 60 20 times. I'm now going to switch it up and I'm going to begin dividing with 2. Since 20 is still even, I can still divide by 2, or I could have used 5. Remember, either number is fine. So 2 will divide into 20 10 times. And since 10 is still an even number, I'm going to continue dividing by 2. So 2 will divide into 10 5 times. And now for my prime number that I can divide into 5, of course, it will be 5. So 5 divides into 5 once. So now that we've completely prime factorized both 40 and 60, we're going to now express both numbers as a product of its prime factors. I remember that the numbers on the left hand side of your division ladder, you know those numbers that we divided by, those numbers are our prime factors. So that is what we're going to use to express this number in expanded form. And I'm going to make sure I begin with the smallest number so that I can have these numbers set up from least to greatest, making sure that I catch every number. And even in cases where you have those large numbers where you may need to list multiple factors, prime factors, remember that you can always multiply your prime factors back to make sure that they get the number that you began with. So for example, I have 2 times 2. I know 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 will give me 8. And then 8 times 5 is equal to 40. Now my prime factor should always equal to the number that I prime factorize. And if it doesn't, then that's a red flag that something in your working is not correct. And you need to go back and check your answer, check your division, check your steps. Something is not correct. So make sure that you take that extra precaution and just multiply your numbers after you prime factorize to ensure that you know the answer is correct and that even your steps of division is correct. So there's nothing wrong with checking the answer. It's always good to be extra careful. There's no harm in being careful. So now I'm expressing 60 as a product of its prime factors, and in 60 I have two 2's, I have one 3 and one 5. So now at this step, after we have prime factorized these numbers, we're now going to calculate our LCM. And in calculating our LCM, the first thing we're going to do is group our like numbers or our like prime factors together. So in 40 and 60, I have a common 2. I have another common 2. And then I have a common 5. So now we have two 2's that are common and one 2. And then we have our 2 and our 3 that is left over. Now here's how this is going to work with your prime factors. We are going to be using all of the numbers when we're calculating the LCM. There is no number that is left off. So you have to make sure that every number that is prime factorized is used. Now with the grouping, only different with the grouping is when you have pairs, you're going to be using one of those numbers. So in my first group, I'll use 1, 2. In the second pairing, I will use 1, 2. And then in my pairing for my 5, I will use 1, 5. Now for the number 2 and the number 3 that is left over, I will also be including those numbers. So that's my 2 and my 3 will also be included in my multiplication. So when we're calculating the LCM, you make sure that all of these prime factors are used. So now that we have listed all of the prime factors and our product, our expanded form is set up, let's begin our multiplication. So I'm going to do my little rough working in the corner so that it's going to be a little easier for my people who may need to follow along with me. So 2 times 2 is 4. Then I have my next 2, where 4 times 2 is going to be 8. I remember that you don't need to do this. If you can work it out right there on the page, that's fine. So for my persons that need to go through the step, I'll go through the step for you so that you can work along with me. If not, remember that you can always, if you're quicker at your working out, that's fine. Go through the quick process to get your answer. So we are going to get 120 for our LCM. So this is one approach that you can take to calculate these numbers. Okay, so I hope this approach was helpful to you. Remember that in calculation, whichever approach is best for you, if you like to group your numbers to multiply, or if you need to go in the corner and just work all of the numbers out, whichever method works for you, use that method. We all learn differently, they all are working at different paces, and we all need a different speed in which to calculate our answer. Okay, so make sure that you get some additional practice in, and as always, I'll be right here in the next video making math easy.